Vienna, 2:14 in the morning. Inside a quiet European bank, a single terminal glows in an empty office. A man in a dark hoodie sits down, plugs in a device the size of a USB stick, and starts typing. 15 minutes later, he stands up and walks out. By sunrise, the bank discovers $10 million gone, moved through 9 countries before anyone even noticed the login. To understand how this happened, we need to rewind 6 months. The target wasn't a vault or a safe. It was a piece of aging hardware sitting in nearly every European bank branch. A hardware security module, the little black box that verifies every transaction. Nobody imagined it could be beaten with a tool costing less than a dinner for 2. The man behind the hoodie was not a hacker in the Hollywood sense. He was a former payment systems technician, fired 2 years earlier for a minor policy violation. He knew the machines from the inside. He knew their firmware, their update cycles, and one detail the manufacturer never fixed. A debug port meant only for factory testing. That debug port was the flaw. It let engineers bypass encryption checks during factory calibration, a shortcut that was never supposed to survive into production. But it did, on thousands of units across the continent. All it took to reach it was a tiny hardware interface tool sold online for about $5. Over 4 months, he tested the exploit quietly in a rented apartment on a decommissioned unit he'd kept from his old job. Every attempt was logged, refined, timed. He wasn't looking for a big score yet. He was looking for a repeatable process, something he could execute the same way in every branch without leaving a trace. By the 5th month, he had it down to a script and a checklist. Insert tool, trigger debug mode, push a modified firmware patch that quietly disabled transaction limits. 12 steps, memorized, timed with a stopwatch. His personal best in rehearsal was 11 minutes and 40 seconds. He wanted margin for the real thing. He picked his target branch for one reason. It processed overnight interbank transfers automatically, without a human reviewing each one until morning. If the disabled limits went unnoticed for even a few hours, transfers could clear internationally before any fraud alert triggered. Timing wasn't just important, it was the entire plan. Now we return to the night itself. 2:14 a.m. He's inside, tool in hand. 90 seconds to open the service panel. 2 minutes to locate the debug port behind the casing. By the 4-minute mark, the firmware patch is uploading, and the countdown he rehearsed for 5 months has officially begun. With transaction limits disabled, he opens a second laptop, already loaded with dozens of shell company accounts across 9 countries, all created months earlier through forged documents. He initiates the first transfer, $600,000. It clears in under 4 seconds. He barely reacts. He just moves to the next one. Transfer after transfer fires off in rapid succession. Cyprus, Malta, Estonia, Slovakia. Each one below the threshold that would normally trigger a manual review, except there is no threshold anymore. He's not stealing one large sum. He's bleeding the bank through dozens of wounds at once, faster than any single alert could catch. At the 12-minute mark, the total crosses $8 million. He checks the time. He's ahead of schedule. 3 final transfers push the number past 10 million. He closes both laptops, removes the $5 tool, and reseals the service panel exactly as he found it. Total time inside the branch, 14 minutes, 51 seconds. The branch manager arrived at 7 a.m. to a flood of automated overdraft alerts nobody could explain. He assumed a software glitch. It took the bank's own IT team almost 6 hours to realize the transfers weren't errors. They were real. They were gone, and they had already been split, rerouted, and withdrawn in 3 different currencies. The case landed with a financial crimes unit already stretched thin across 3 jurisdictions. Leading the investigation was a fraud analyst who had seen plenty of phishing scams and card skimmers, but never a firmware-level breach of a device the industry considered untouchable. She started not with the money, but with the machine itself. It took her team 11 days to identify the debug port vulnerability and another 3 weeks to trace the firmware patch's digital fingerprint back to a compiler used almost exclusively by former employees of the module's manufacturer. That list had 42 names. Only one had been fired for cause and had no record of employment since. He was arrested crossing a border 6 weeks later, carrying 2 laptops and roughly $400,000 in cash, the rest already laundered through shell accounts and cryptocurrency exchanges across 9 countries. Investigators recovered barely a third of the original $10 million. The manufacturer quietly patched the debug port in every unit still in service. $10 million, 15 minutes, and a tool that cost less than his lunch that day. The bank upgraded every device within the year. But somewhere, the same vulnerable hardware may still sit unpatched in smaller institutions that never got the warning. The question isn't whether it can happen again. It's whether anyone would notice in time.